Hello, everyone, and welcome to PCR's February Virtual Transition Times. My name is Melissa Wyman, and I am PCR's Respite Care and Community Engagement Director. I will be your moderator this evening, so please feel free to send any questions or comments in the chat box below. We are delighted to offer this presentation with American Sign Language simultaneous interpretation. We will also be offering this presentation with Spanish language subtitles and Spanish language documents soon. Both the English and Spanish language versions will be sent out to you via email and will also be archived on the PCR website Transition Times page. Please share the recording and upcoming Transition Times program with your friends and others in the community. It is very important to continue to spread the word about transition times so we can continue to better serve our community. I want to give a special thanks to Heidi De Paula, PCR volunteer, and Rita Scheinberg, MC Transitions, for all their help with transition times and the dedication to our families and their loved ones. I also want to thank Deborah Mark and Ann Stevenson from the ARC Montgomery County for their help with registration. Just some Zoom tip reminders. To best view the presentation, please click on View Options on the top of your screen and make sure to click side by side mode, that the side by side mode is checked. To turn on closed captioning, click on Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen and select your preference, either live transcript or full transcript. There will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box. Tim will respond to your questions at the end of the presentation. We are fortunate tonight to have as our presenter Tim Weens, Executive Director of the Maryland Inclusive Housing Corporation. He previously served as the Executive Director of Jubilee Association of Maryland for over 40 years. Without further ado, Tim.
Good evening. It's so good to be here with you. I can't see your faces, but maybe later when we get past this, I can. I'm sure there are many people out there who I know and who I have interacted with in my many years with Jubilee. It was only slightly more than 40 years that I was there. So I retired from Jubilee in June of 2019, a little over a year and a half ago. So I want to talk a little bit about how we kind of got to this point before I jump into the slides. In my final years at Jubilee, I was asked to chair what was called a DDA Supported Living Advisory Committee. And DDA was and is committed to, I'm sure you've heard of the transformation that DDA is trying to lead the state through. And this has been going on for 5 or 6 years, so it's not new. But what does that look like for residential services? What does that look like for housing? And so the Deputy Secretary, Bernie Simons, asked me, and at the time Judy Paddock, to co-chair this task force and to make recommendations to them, to DDA, as to what DDA needed to do to really begin transforming residential services into the modern day. And so that committee met for a year, and we came up with recommendations, and then Bernie asked us to stay on and help implement those recommendations. And during this time was around when I announced my retirement from Jubilee, and I called Bernie to let him know what my plans were. And so he said, "We're sorry to see you leave Jubilee, but he said, now that you're leaving Jubilee, maybe you'd like to help us implement some of these recommendations. And I said, I'm not looking for a full-time job, but if I could do this half-time working from home, this might be a good fit for me. And so that's kind of how this is played out. So let's go to the next slide now. So kind of why are these changes happening? These changes moving the system from group homes towards supported living. That's what we're talking about here. Creating housing options for people with IDD that live in houses that are not owned or controlled or rented by the service provider. And so we start with our first assumption is that people with IDD want to live in their own homes. They want control over where they live and who they live with. And it's really an extension of the philosophy of self-determination. Self-determination has been around for a long time, and it is still very much the center philosophical framework for what our services look like. And it's about giving individuals and their families more control over their lives. And by controlling your housing, you move a lot toward that direction. As I said, it's really part of DDA's transformation plan to separate housing from services. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in another slide. But also it's a reflection of what the changes that are happening at Medicaid. And Medicaid is the primary underlying funding source for many of the services that people, especially adults with IDD, receive. And there are two changes that have occurred in Medicaid policy and practices. One is the new setting standard and this came out 5 years ago. This is not new, but it really looks at all settings and say, do these settings have the effect of isolating the person from the larger society? And so with the settings rule, I think group homes and other congregate arrangements come under higher scrutiny. It's not that you can't have group homes, but there's a higher level of scrutiny for group homes. And I think the bias is towards supported living. The other change that is happening at Medicaid is the unbundling of services. And so it used to be that you would get a daily rate. This was your rate for residential services. And even though it didn't maybe spell that out exactly, kind of the housing was part of that rate. And service providers used that rate to buy homes, to pay mortgages, to pay rent. And then people living in these homes paid a fee that was to go to housing and utilities, but the fee maybe usually didn't really cover those costs. So if Medicaid and DDA aren't paying for housing, who is? And that's kind of why we're here, to look at how that works. So next slide, please. So just to talk a little bit about DDA housing priorities and policies. And again, this is not new news, but just so that you're clear, they have said that they are committed to developing policies and practices that favor supporting individuals where housing is separate from services. And so that's the direction that their policy and practices are moving. They're committed to developing a housing support services workforce to work along CCS workers, coordinators of community support, to help people figure out to navigate the affordable housing landscape. And they are committed to creating financial incentives and flexibility in funding to make the supported living model work. And I think you'll see that reflected in the new rate system for residential and supported living services. There's more flexibility in supported living in terms of how you pay for housing. And finally, they're committed to collaborating with organizations, establishing new structures to create affordable housing for people with IDD. And MIH is one of those new structures. DDA and Medicaid have both been clear that they are not in the business of closing group homes. So if you or one of your family members lives in a group home, nobody's going to be coming around trying to close the group home. And so people have said to me that who live in small group homes, you know, I like who I live with. I love my house. I know my neighbors. Why do I need to move? And the answer is you don't. We're not trying to demonize group homes. I think there are many great services that are provided there. Many of them are very connected to their community. We just think that the supported living model has a better chance of people having more control over their lives and being better included in their communities. So next slide, please. So I told you that there were two recommendations that came out of the DDA Supported Living Advisory Committee. So one of them was the creation of MIH, the Maryland Inclusive Housing Corporation, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And the other was the rental assistance program. And Diane Dressler, some of you probably know the name. She worked for DDA for many years. She's worked as a consultant in housing. She worked very closely with me on the DDA Supported Living Advisory Committee. And she consults with the Maryland Department of Disability. And so she, more than any one person, is the architect of this rental assistance program. Under this program, and the program is not up and running yet, it's being implemented, it's kind of coming. The rent subsidy will be a tenant-based. And so that's like the housing choice voucher, if you're familiar with that. Being tenant-based is if you qualify and you're eligible, you can take your subsidy and live anywhere you want in the state of Maryland, anywhere you want within, you know, some parameters that we'll get to. But it's tied to the individual. It's not, they call a project-based voucher is a voucher that's tied to the place. You know, you get the subsidy if you live here. These are tenant-based, so the person can take them with them. They're also designed to last indefinitely. So it's not a bridge subsidy. It's not a 3-year subsidy. It's an ongoing subsidy. As long as you're eligible and you need the subsidy and you're not getting the subsidy from another source, you could keep it. The participants would pay no more than 30% of their household income for rent and utilities, and the subsidy pays the balance. And then the units that are leased, the rents have to be consistent with the federal fair market standard. And I have included the website in this bullet 4. And it's the HUD website. It's the same thing that HOC uses in Montgomery County. And so in populous jurisdictions like Montgomery County, it's actually calculated by zip code. And so it means that you can afford to rent an apartment in Potomac or Bethesda or Chevy Chase, as well as in Wheaton and Aspen Hill and Silver Spring. So it's tiered based on where the apartment is. So next slide, please. So you can see from what I'm saying, the program is very much mirrors the HUD, Housing and Urban Development, what used to be called Section 8, now is called Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's very similar to that, except it's using state dollars. It's not using federal dollars. So the waiting list for getting rental assistance will be managed by the Maryland Department of Disabilities. And they currently manage a waiting list for what's called the Weinberg Apartments and the 811 program. And some of you are probably familiar with those. And this would be set up parallel to those. And so You can be on the waiting list of all three of those. And they're a little bit different in some of their qualifications, but the application is essentially very similar. The rental payments then, the subsidies will be paid by the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, and this DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, will also do inspections of the units to make sure that they meet code. This program was the recommendation of this DDA Supported Living Advisory Committee. It was the recommendation was made to DDA. They accepted the recommendation, and they are working to implement it. So there is funding currently to do infrastructure work to kind of get it going. And so the Maryland Department of Disabilities is in the process of working on the waiting list. So nothing is open, you can't apply yet, but they are in the process of working on it. They're also in the process of making an agreement with the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development to do the payments and to do the inspections. So there is some possibility that some funding might be available in FY22, but it's far from certain. I would hope that by FY23 we start to see the rolling out of these subsidies. The budgets that we're dealing with now, both for MIH and for the rental assistance program, were severely cut back in the FY21 budget. When they were initially submitting proposals for the FY22 budget, it was back in the fall. They were still very nervous about what revenue might look like. So as we come out of the pandemic and as finances improve, I'm hoping that this program will get started. The average cost that we have calculated for per person per year is about $10,000, and that includes the cost of it kind of administering this. So we're looking at, when this is fully funded, the plan is that somewhere around 450 or 500 people could be receiving this for a cost of around $5 million a year. So that's what the end goal that we hope to get to in 3 or 4 years. So that's the rental assistance program. MIH has no official role in this program. Obviously, it ties into what we're doing, but we don't have any jurisdiction over it. We're monitoring it because it's part of these initiatives that I've talked about. All right, so next slide, please. So now we come to Maryland Inclusive Housing Corporation. As we were talking about kind of how to systemically move our state forward, we were looking around the country at what other states were doing. And Bernie Simon said, why don't you look at what they call Mo Housing in Missouri? And Missouri is where Bernie had been the state director before he came to Maryland. So it was there when it was started, I think, when he was there. And there are 3 goals that we have for Maryland Inclusive Housing. And I'm going to go through them quickly now, and then I'll go into more depth on each of them. One is to be an information clearinghouse related to helping people navigate affordable housing. 2 is to facilitate housing teams around the state of Maryland. And we're starting with Howard and Montgomery counties and Baltimore City. And then 3 is to employ what we call community living coordinators that will work with the local housing committees, but they're kind of housing case managers. They would work with CCS workers. All right, next slide, please. So this is our board of directors. I'm going to say a little bit about each of the members and why we have the board that we do. So Alan Sheehan is the board president. He's the director of programs at Service Coordination Incorporated. A lot of the ways that these new initiatives will work is through the work of the coordinators of community support, the CCS workers. And so, you know, understanding that system and how we interface with that system is really critical. And so that was why he was asked to join the board, because he brings that expertise. Nicole LeBlanc is the vice president. Nicole is a disability rights advocate. She is the PAL coordinator for, it should be HSRI. I misspelled that. She had worked for a couple of years for DDA in the Southern Maryland Regional Office as a disability advocate in the regional office. Rachel London is the board secretary. She is the executive director of the Maryland DD Council. The initiative that started in Missouri started with the DD Council. It's really kind of could be seen as a demonstration project, and it's an important constituency to us what the DD Council is doing. Michael Ahern is the treasurer, and he is the senior vice president at Sandy Spring Bank. He's been very involved with disability service providers, especially in Prince George's County. Andy Culp is the executive director of the ARC of Maryland. She had been the executive director of Compass, which provides services here in Montgomery County, and worked for many of the ARCs across the state before she ended up in this role. Stephanie Killian is the chief of the Division of Housing of the Montgomery County Department of Housing and Community Affairs, right here in Montgomery County. Stephanie is truly our housing expert on the board of directors. I'm gonna talk about, you know, many of the great initiatives that have happened here in Montgomery County, and I have no doubt that Stephanie had a hand in all of those. I mean, she's been with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs for many years, and is a true leader and treasurer here in Montgomery County, and we're delighted to have her on our board. And then Clarissa Mitchell is the CEO of Epic, which is a service provider in Prince George's County. Clarissa is also on the executive committee of MAX. And so one of the things we wanted to do in our board of directors, since it's a statewide transformation effort, is have representation from the various statewide organizations. And so Nicole LeBlanc, in addition to being a self-advocate, is representing people on the go. Rachel London, obviously the DD Council, Andy Culp, the ARC of Maryland, and then Clarissa Mitchell represents MAX, our service provider agency. So it's a great board. It likely, you know, it's a new board, and we likely will grow and add members and in the coming years. All right, next slide, please. So I mentioned the Information Clearinghouse. It will be the foundation of this Information Clearinghouse will be our website, and when we get to the last slide, you'll see our website, and I would invite you to go there. We are, you know, I call us a startup. You know, we are just kind of getting going. I am a half-time executive director. We have one other staff, Andrea Mast, who is our operations manager. She's working half-time. We had anticipated a bigger budget for FY21, but things were cut back, you know, with the pandemic, and so I think the information clearinghouse will be one of the kind of the three goals. It will lag behind the most in terms of it really being robust. And so, but the idea is that people can be clear about what DDA policy is related to housing and residential services. They can be clear about what the resources are out there, both DDA resources and others. It will track the work of the regional housing teams. And so you can see what teams are doing, what teams or committees are doing around the state. It will provide speakers. So what I'm doing tonight really falls into that, talking with you about the transformation and where things are going. We will, be a resource to the housing committees and to agencies. And, we will, right now, we're not really using social media because we don't have the staff to manage it. But yeah, we will have a presence on social media going forward. So that's the information clearinghouse. If we go to the next slide, please. So the regional housing teams, we anticipate that all of the major counties in terms of population will have their own team. I think in the more rural areas of the state, you may have a team covering several of those rural counties. It's really an attempt to bring together the players to plan for and advocate for more and more accessible, affordable housing for people with IDD. It's a place to connect the community living coordinators who are working with individuals with the more macro work of looking at new housing and how to access existing housing. Each committee or each team will set goals specific to that jurisdiction. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this is the beginning of the committee. We haven't filled all the slots that we want to, but we're going to get started. I sent out a doodle poll today to all the members to say what times work for you to meet. So I expect that we will be meeting in mid-March for our first meeting. Jillian Copeland from Main Street has agreed to co-chair, along with Tigist Alamu, who is the executive director of Community Options. And Tigist and I worked together at Jubilee for many years, and so that's how I kind of got to know her. But I think they will provide terrific leadership to the committee. And I have already been meeting with Tigist and Jillian, and we've been talking about committee members and doing some planning. We expect some of the county departments to be represented, and Stephanie Killian, who is on the MIH board, will represent the Department of Housing and Community Affairs and work with us. And so that's an incredibly valuable link. Rolando Santiago is the Chief of Behavioral Health and Crisis Services at DHHS. He is going to start out on the committee. I've been talking with him, and he has been talking with Raymond Crowell, the Director of Health and Human Services. And I'm sure we will have somebody from Aging and Disability, but we just haven't kind of got there yet. And Rolando or somebody from his department may or may not stay on the team. In talking to Rolando, a lot of the issues for people with chronic mental illness are the same as for people with IDD when it comes to housing. If they want treatment, there are treatment facilities they can go into, but if they just want housing, a lot of those housing programs are Medicaid funding, and Medicaid doesn't pay for housing. So how do they get the housing? How does that work? And it's not that nothing is being done, but there is work to be done there, and it's really a parallel kind of effort. And just to pause as I go through this committee to say, our mandate is affordable and accessible housing for people with disabilities, with IDD. We expect and plan to work much more broadly with other affordable housing interests. And so we expect to work advocating for affordable housing for people with physical disabilities that don't have an intellectual disability. We expect to be working with the racial justice issues around housing. We expect to be working generally with homelessness and affordable housing. So we don't want to come in and take a slice of the existing pie. We want to help grow the pie, and we want to make sure that we have kind of a seat at the table. And so some of the committee work reflects that broader kind of look than just IDD. I did a presentation to both the Commission on People with Disabilities and the DD Advisory Committee to the Commission for People with Disabilities. And we have asked, and he has agreed, for Larry Braum from Easter Seals to be on the committee. He is a commissioner, he's on the commission, and he also is co-chair of the DD Advisory Committee. And the plan is, we're not a subcommittee of them, but the plan is we'll be on their email list, we'll be invited to their meetings, and we'll come to them and report periodically to the DD Advisory Committee. And in that committee, if it needs to go to the full commission, that committee could bring it to the full commission, and Larry could do that, could help us with that. Two parent advocates that we've asked that to be on the committee. Chuck Short, I'm sure many of you know that name. His son Charlie has a visual disability. Chuck has been a servant, a public servant in Montgomery County for decades and decades, and incredibly well connected. We're delighted that he's agreed to join us. And then John Bogowski is also somebody who is incredibly involved throughout the county on disability issues, Special Olympics, most particularly, but many other areas. So those are the two parent advocates. There are three service providers that we've invited to be on the committee. Rick Callahan is the co-chair of Interact, the Providers Association. He's the executive director at Compass. Steve Keener, my replacement at Jubilee, is the chair of the Housing Committee of Interact. I really was proud of the work that we did at Jubilee around housing. A lot of the new initiatives that, these initiatives take years. And a lot of the initiatives that I had started that hadn't been completed, Steve has picked up on and is carrying forward. So Jubilee really has not lost a step with his leadership. I'm so proud of his work and what Jubilee continues to do. And then David Irving, who is the CEO of JFGH, who is a really an emerging leader in our county. And I think JFGH is, it's Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, but they do so much more than group homes. And we're delighted to have him on the committee. There are two self-advocates that we've identified that we're asking, and we haven't heard back from them, but we will definitely have self-advocates. And we're also, we will be asking Stacy Spann at HOC to see who he wants to have represent HOC on the committee, where we would really love to have an HOC representative, and we expect that we will. So this is the group that we're starting with. We may add some people. And so certainly, if you feel that you or your group was left out of this and needs to be represented, I would welcome your email. Be happy to hear from you. It won't be simply my decision, but we will look at that as a committee. So this is the committee. I'm very excited to be working with them. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just give you a taste of, what goals that we might work on. And these are things that have come up in my conversations with people. Certainly no committee has adopted these yet, but just to give you an idea. So when I was at Jubilee, I met with Kate Stewart, who is the mayor of Takoma Park. And she said, we would love to have more special needs, I think she called it. So broader than just intellectual and developmental disabilities, but they would love to do something in Takoma Park. And they had indeed some money set aside to help with this. And I know Steve Keener, my successor, has met with her as well, as has Jillian Copeland. And the message is consistent that Takoma Park would like to do something. That's an opportunity that you don't want to walk away from. When you have a jurisdiction saying, we want to do something for affordable housing for people with disabilities in our community, I mean, that is gold. And so I would be pretty sure that we'll continue to talk with her and explore that and see what the opportunities are there. One of the issues that has come up in various conversations I've had is both agencies and other groups have these, HUD 811 group homes. These were sort of large group homes that were funded, many of them 20 or 30 years ago, and they have all kind of requirements, federal requirements there. You can't just walk away from them. What do we do with those 811? How do we transform that real estate into, what we're doing today? And I think the new 811 rules, the new federal 811 rules allow for a lot more innovation. So the 811 program that we talked about earlier, where the waiting list is managed through the Maryland Department of Disability, is an example of that. But still, you have these historic properties that I think most people just want to get rid of, but you don't want to just you can't walk away from it. And what do we do with that asset? What do we do with that real estate? And so I think that it's not a local issue. It starts as a local issue. And it's a bigger issue. So, that could be an example of something that we take on. Certainly, I think we're going to want to collaborate with the Housing Opportunities Commission. They are a player in so much of affordable housing that happens in the county. They've done a lot, with disability housing. And so we're going to want to cooperate with them. So those, again, are kind of just ideas. Okay, next slide, please. So now the third goal was these community living coordinators. And so let me talk a little bit about them. So they will be a regional contact for providing technical assistance for affordable housing. They, as I said earlier, also, kind of the model of how this would work is if housing support services is paid for through the Medicaid waiver, and even Maryland Inclusive Housing isn't yet certified by Medicaid to bill for this, but it's our plan to do that. But other agencies can do that as well, and we're not trying to have a corner on this market. Indeed, it's very much like CCS workers, that the system is designed for you to have a choice. And so the CLC, the community living coordinators, would, if the sorry about all the acronyms, but if you're CCS worker, your coordinator community support, identifies that you want to move out of your parents' home, move out of a group home, change homes, they can say, well, let's bring in a community living coordinator, or let's bring in a housing case manager, a community living to help with that, to navigate that. And so MIH's job is to navigate the housing market for individuals using, this goal, the community living coordinator. It's not to provide other services. And so it's our assumption that regardless of your type or your level of disability, you can live in a place other than a group home, and you can get whatever level of services you need. And that's the team's job to plan that. And then we become part of that team. Our community living coordinator becomes part of that team. And it's a time limited role to get the person into, to apply for, or get them eligible for, help them transition into housing. And then we would sort of go away. Our community living coordinators would go away, but could be brought back in if there was a housing related issue, if there was an issue with the landlord, or eligibility, or those kind of things. We would expect that the design is that we will have community living coordinators throughout the state, and they will become experts in their region about what is available in their region. And so they will attend the local team meetings. We have in our budget to hire a community living coordinator starting in April. And it's the advertisement is on our website. So if you or somebody you know is interested, please go to our website and look for that, and we would be happy to receive your letter of interest. So next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening now. As the board and I, the MIH board and I, were thinking about where to start. We knew we couldn't start everywhere. We wanted to start in places where we were pretty confident that we would be successful. And Montgomery County was one of those. I know that a lot is happening already. And Howard County, there's a lot happening in Howard County as well. There's less happening in Baltimore City. And so, we didn't want to start with just kind of easy situations, but we wanted to start with a couple that where a lot was happening already. And obviously, because of my work in Montgomery County, I know a lot of the players, and it was easier for me to kind of provide leadership. So I just want to talk a little bit about what's happening already, because it's not like this new idea. It's happening out there, and we want more of it to happen is the idea. So, as you can see in the slide, there are people who have IDD that live in their own condos and houses. There are many people that are getting subsidized living with subsidies in apartments with vouchers or other subsidies. Many families have helped their family member either purchase a house, or maybe the family member with the disability has inherited that house and is living there. People are getting services through self-direction. People are getting personal support services and supported living services already. A lot of that is happening already. Target Community Services in Montgomery County has been around. They've been doing supported apartment living for a couple decades, a great program. ILO, Integrated Living Opportunities, also has been supporting people living in their own places in apartments for many, many years, and is really at the head of the curve doing that. As I said, Jubilee Association. Jubilee has partnered with Rosario Communities to have people live in houses that are connected to local parishes. You don't have to be Catholic or Christian to live there, but it's owned by Rosario Communities, and you have the benefit of that parish community. The PCR house, the Sullivan House, is Jubilee is partnering with PCR Corporation to provide services there. And then the Fireside Apartments in Rockville, in which Jubilee has vouchers for 14 apartments, and people within this kind of garden apartment community of about maybe 280 units, there are 14 that will be set aside for people with disability, and Jubilee is managing that. Main Street Apartments in Rockville just opened this past summer, really a national model for, what can be done. Howard County has a project called Patuxent Commons, which the Howard County Autism Society is doing, which will be in a lot of ways similar to Main Street Apartments. And it's not been built yet, but it's quite a ways along. And Heritage Housing Incorporated is a corporation in Howard County that owns and manages real estate, but doesn't provide services. The Arc of Howard County, Humanum, used to be Gallagher, provided services to people that live in some of those homes. So there are many examples of this happening. What we're trying to do is move it beyond examples to be systemic, so that it can be a reality for anybody that wants this. So next slide, please. So if you would like to be on our email list, you can go to our website. You can go to this www.mih-inc.org/contact, and you put your email address in the subscribe box. And then we're not sending out updates yet, but once we start getting a bunch of people on that, we will. So feel free to do that. I think if you go to the website, my email address is also there. There it is, tweens@mih-inc.org. So that's the best way to get in touch with me. So that is my presentation. I am now happy to entertain questions.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So we have a few questions so far. So one of the first questions that we have, let me start my video real quick. Okay, thank you. Is MIH only for people for people with IDD getting DDA services? So I'm sorry, I know that we're using a lot of acronyms, and so for individuals getting the DDA services, or could those who don't qualify for DDA services but have significant intellectual disabilities get, be able to use this?
So yes, those people can use this. I'll qualify that a little bit. So housing support services is a DDA funded Medicaid waiver service. So if to get housing support services, you would need to have DDA either eligibility or funding. And the rental assistance program is for people who are either qualified on the waiting list or getting DDA services. The Information Clearinghouse and the work of the Housing Committee is broader than that. So we will be identifying affordable places for people to live, and you don't have to get services. You don't have to be on the DDA waiting list to live in those places. So yeah, it's a little bit mixed. We certainly will benefit more than just people who are DDA eligible, but some of the services, the rental assistance and the housing case management, is targeted to that.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, how do we find out who to contact housing support services workforce personnel, and coordinators of community services in the county that we live in.
So, get on this email group that I talked about. That would be the best way. You can also, go to our website, and we try to keep our website updated. And certainly, the County Aging and Disability Services has a much broader knowledge of what's going on beyond just what we're doing. And so they're always a resource. But if you specifically want to work with us, our website and getting on that email list is the best way.
Okay, thanks. How do you register for the waiting list?
So again, I think the Montgomery County Department of Aging and within Department of Health and Human Services, Aging and Disability Division, that's the place that can help you with that. I think if you call 311 and ask, they will connect you with that county department, and they can then put you in touch with folks that can help you get on the DDA waiting list.
Okay, thank you. Are individuals currently living at homes with families very low on the priority list for housing?
No. So I think the rental assistance program it will prioritize people who are homeless. But beyond people that are homeless, there's no kind of ranking of who's first in line. The feeling is once the rental assistance program is there, that it will take a while for us to see people using it. So I think if you stay on top of the availability of the rental assistance program, and certainly we will cover this on our website and in our emails, I think the opportunity will be there.
All right, thank you. So what are the requirements to be a CLC, so Community Living Coordinator?
So you need to have a bachelor's degree in a related area, and you need to have experience working in the field of working with adults with developmental disabilities, at least 1 year of experience. So that's the basic requirements.
Okay, the next question is the housing going to be for one or more people? And if it is for more than one person, will they still pay the same amount money-wise?
So the housing there'll be many different types of housing. And so there isn't kind of one type. If you would visit one of the Jubilee Rosario houses, or if you would visit the PCR house, people might say, oh, it looks a lot like a group home, right? And I think there are 4 people that live in the PCR house, and they each have their own bedroom. It's a beautiful house. But the difference is they rent from PCR. They don't rent from Jubilee. And so whatever their rent is, whatever PCR is charging, then the rental assistance would pay 70% of that. So it could be people living, in group settings. It wouldn't be, I don't think, people living in homes with more than 4 people. It might be apartments like Main Street. I think you're going to see more and more people living in apartments, and service providers figuring out ways to support people, even if they need a lot of high level of support to be able to live in their own apartments with support.
Okay, so one of the things you were talking about was that there were a few slots. Somebody said, how many slots do you have left?
So we don't really have any, I'm trying to think what they're referring to. Maybe the board of directors. We don't have the board, or not the board of directors. Well, I think both the MIH board and the Montgomery County committee, we don't have an upper number. I think we don't want it to be too big because we want it to be a decision-making committee. So I think we wouldn't want to get beyond 20, and we're at about 15. So.
Okay, so and then would you be available for private pay or participants not getting DDA funding? I think one of the things is that for people that aren't getting DDA funding, they are having a lot of trouble finding a source of funding. So is there another source of funding or any resources, suggestions you can share?
So we wouldn't be, we're not available for private pay. We're funded by DDA. You know, we've been affected by the budget cuts that were made in the last year, and we expect the community living coordinators to some of the funding for what they do will come from Medicaid waiver billing, and some of it will come from grants. And I think the part that comes from grants will have more flexibility in who we work with. And so some of those people, you know, may not need to be DDA funded to get some of that work. But we're not really available for private pay.
Okay, so what if you are not on the waiver? Can you participate in the MIH program?
The waiver only pays for the kind of housing case management. The housing, all the housing resources that we're working to develop, the information clearinghouse, none of that is connected to the waiver or DDA funding. So yeah, everybody can benefit from us. It's just that some people may not be able to benefit from some of the housing support services work we do.
Okay, thank you. Is there any talk of supported living being a service that will eventually be possible to self-direct services? In some counties, there are few to no agencies that provide supported living.
So I think supported, I'm not the ultimate expert on this, but I think supported living and self-directed are two different models. And so I think I think supported living as it's being rolled out is going to become widely available, even though it may not be available everywhere. And self-directed, again, is becoming much more widely available, but those are kind of two different models.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. Will you develop MIH committees for other counties besides the ones that you have mentioned?
So yes, so our plan is, and this was the plan that was presented to DDA, who was supportive of this, and Bernie Simons from DDA has been incredibly supportive of helping us keep going through these difficult times. But our plan was to have a full-time director of housing and a full-time director of communications. That's still our plan. As long as it's just me doing it, we're not going to go beyond the two counties in Baltimore City. Once we hire a director of housing, you know, which I'm hoping that we will do by mid-year, you know, in a year from now that we'll have that position, then we will begin expanding beyond Baltimore City and Howard and Montgomery counties. Yes.
All right, thank you. So if you are on the wait list for community pathways, can someone receive housing assistance through this?
So if you're on the waiting list, so it's not completely clear, and I kind of talked about this earlier. In order to get housing support services, you do have to be funded at some level, and your team has to meet and make a referral for housing support services. So I think that is tied to DDA and waiver funding.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So does the housing voucher currently on, I think they're currently on the HOC waitlist. Does the housing voucher have the same as the rental assistance discussed today? Can you register for both?
Yeah, you should definitely register for both. I mean, they are very similar. You know, I'm sure as a agency funded by the state of Maryland, we'd rather have the federal government pay for it than the state. So if you can get the HOC voucher, you definitely should do that. But the reality is that it's a long waiting list, and not everybody's going to get the vouchers, and that's why the rental assistance supplements that. So if you're getting neither, you should definitely apply for rental assistance. You can't apply yet. It's the waiting list isn't open, but they are working on it. But you definitely can apply for both.
Okay, thank you. And then how do we get help to coordinate support services for someone in independent housing? Can MIH help?
So if you're living in independent housing and if you have DDA funding, you can ask the team to try to identify somebody to provide housing support services. So doesn't matter where you live. What matters is if you're eligible for DDA funding, and you would access that through your team. And even though MIH isn't yet providing housing support services, other agencies, you know, I know that Jubilee is already doing it, and I think other agencies are as well. The billing procedure, you know, the whole billing procedures for DDA have been, you know, frustrating and slow to emerge. And so, but you can certainly ask for it now, but the way to ask for it is through your team.
Okay, thanks. So the next question is there any vision to assist individuals who are low income in purchasing housing?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Again, we will be working with committees in each region to identify what are the priorities, where do we want to put our emphasis. And there are programs to, you know, homeowner programs. You know, in a place like Montgomery County, it's very difficult for a very low income person to access that. So it's not out of the question, but it's certainly on the table.
Okay, thank you. So how does the role of the housing case manager differ from that of the community living coordinator?
It's the same thing. I've kind of used those interchangeably.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. So, all right, let me see. We have some of the same questions. Okay, so if DDA pays 70%, who pays the remainder if it is not privately paid?
So DDA would pay the remainder, and they would pay it through the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development.
Okay, thanks again for that clarification. Another question I saw. Okay, so what percentage of individuals with disabilities needing housing are you aiming for at a goal? I think you talked about some number, but it was they asked about 450 to 500 individuals.
Right. So that's the advisory committee, you know, and again, Diane Dressler was kind of our resident expert on this. estimated that a rental assistance program that that supported 450 to 500 people on an ongoing basis would be enough for I don't want to say everybody, but most people who want housing, to get that kind of housing. This would be, again, this is tied to being DDA eligible. Our assumption is that not everybody needs this, that there are many sources of subsidy that people should be accessing, and we want to help people access all of those sources. And so this fills a gap, but it isn't 450 isn't everybody. But some people have jobs and they can afford, there are a lot of affordable housing projects that that you pay below market rent. And a lot of the folks with IDD, not a lot, but a portion can afford those rents. They can afford that. And there are federal vouchers. There are places like Main Street. So there are a lot of opportunities, and the rental assistance is one part of that. And so our thinking is that with a robust work of these committees around the state, with the robust work of housing support services, and with the rental assistance, that should be enough for most people that are DDA eligible to get housing if they need it.
Okay, so just a few more questions. So will the MIH be focused on helping people find housing and create housing opportunities, or do you expect to support people once they are housed? Some quick ideas, resources for job listings, helping people find or train support staff, resources to identify others for social activities.
So we wouldn't be doing most of those things. We would be helping people become eligible, apply, move in, get to know their landlord. And then if there was a housing problem, if they weren't getting along with their roommate or their landlord, or if they became, lost eligibility, we could come back and help with that, but we wouldn't be helping with those other types of issues.
Okay, so that brings up another question. So what are the options for individuals with intellectual development disabilities, with behavioral issues? Is there supports in the house?
So we would be part of the person's team. The person would have a person-centered team, and that team would plan for whatever supports the individual needed, including behavior support. So definitely this is designed for that, but our job isn't to do the behavior support. They would need it. The team would look at where those resources would come from. And so this plan is clearly designed to be accessible to all people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, including people with behavior problems. It's just that MIH, that's not our piece. We wouldn't be doing behavior management.
Okay, thank you. So is this like the sticky voucher? You can use this any apartment, or will it be limited to where you can use it?
The sticky voucher, I hadn't heard that before. It's a good term.
Yeah.
I guess it would be a sticky voucher. You could use it, you stick it on, wherever you find your home. So yeah, this would be a sticky voucher. You don't have, it's not attached to any particular place. You can take it and rent an apartment or house wherever you want.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for, we learn new terms every day.
Yeah,
Okay, so is the rental assistance through the RAP RAP available for all locations or just Rockville? What is the maximum amount of assistance per month?
So the rental assistance, the state rental assistance program that I talked about is available throughout the state of Maryland. You can use it anywhere in the state of Maryland. And as I said in the presentation, the rents are based on where you live. And so what is the fair market rent in your region? And there's, in my slide presentation, there's a link to, where to find out what that would be in wherever you live.
And so with the theme of the RAP program, somebody asked when it will be added to social services. They said social serve.
Social serve. I mean, maybe they're
social serve. Yeah.
Yeah, social serve is there's a company called Social Serve that has the software that runs the waiting list that is being used for other programs with the Maryland Department of Disabilities. And Social Serve works all across the country doing this. And so that's what they're working on now to design this. I don't know. I know that they're working on it, that they're meeting and working on it. I would hope that sometime in FY22, within the next 12 months, that the waiting list is done. There still isn't money for the subsidies, but the waiting list should be done within the year. I'm projecting, I don't know for sure. And, but I don't know if they'll open it if they don't have subsidies. So stay in touch, keep your ears open for that.
Okay, so the next question is, what are requirements for setting up an independent living unit within our own home? Our adult child who is now living with us can be classified as living independently.
So I'm not sure I can answer that question. You can get in-home supports, right now, and that's being done. But in terms of if you wanted to get a rental subsidy for that unit, I don't know the answer to that. I would speculate that if it was categorized as an accessory dwelling unit, and recognized by the county as that may be the pathway to getting that done, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, great. Just a few more questions. So is there a flow chart or other visual that helps people with intellectual developmental disabilities find the right path to housing that meets their needs?
We don't have one. We'll start with that. I think that is, part of the information clearinghouse will be to develop those kind of resources. I'm sure there are some of those out there. I don't know that they're developed with an eye towards people with intellectual disabilities being able to navigate them. But I think that's the kind of thing that we would likely do as part of our information clearinghouse. So look for that in the future.
Okay, great. So one of the last questions. So I think there was just some clarification. So the waiver only pays for housing case management and not towards their actual housing. Is that
That's
correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that is correct. And another clarification was that you have to have a referral in place for housing support services.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Again, so one of the we had a few of our participants one is from Anne Arundel County. And so I think that they're looking, if you know of any housing in Anne Arundel County, because I think they're looking for housing. So
The Arc of the Central Chesapeake, which used to be the Arc of Anne Arundel, and it's broader than just Anne Arundel now, was one of the leaders in innovative housing 15 or 20 years ago. When Jubilee started doing this, we looked to them for what they were doing. I would definitely be in touch with the Arc of the Central Chesapeake about that.
Yes, thank you so much. And so, and then the other thing, so one of our attendees said thank you for one of their questions being answered, and they just had a follow-up. Could you tell us who we could reach out to regarding getting their house classified as accessory dwelling unit?
I mean, I think that is the Montgomery, again, I think if you call 311 and they will put you in touch with the person at the Department of Housing and Community Affairs that would oversee that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I just wanted to also share that in our questions, Mady Carney actually gave her information about ILO, which is Integrated Living Opportunities, which is another housing option that if anybody is not familiar with, definitely go to their website, as well as you can reach out if you have any questions and just feedback. Somebody said that Anne Arundel Arc is amazing with group homes. But I don't think that you can have a self-directed plan. But if you are interested, I definitely think that you should reach out to Anne Arundel Arc because we have some great feedback. So, all right. So thank you so much. So thank you, Tim, for your interesting and informative presentation. So we will be sending out an evaluation to all of our attendees to get feedback from this webinar and get suggestions for future topics. So please complete the survey at your convenience. And so looking ahead to our other virtual transition times meetings, they will all be held the fourth Wednesday of each month through June. All meetings will continue to be offered and simultaneous ASL and will be recorded with Spanish language subtitles and archived on the PCR website. So our next meeting will be Wednesday, March 24th via Zoom at 7 p.m. And the program will focus on MCPS transition services in middle and high school. The presentation will feature Margie Parrott, instructional specialist, Montgomery County Public Schools, and Diane T. Flood, middle school liaison, Montgomery County Public Schools. So please continue to stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you in March. Thank you again, Tim, for a wonderful presentation.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Have a great night.
All right, good night.
Good night.